Who would have thought that Super Monkey Ball would have had so many strange games hidden within its series? So many in fact that in order to talk about them all, I've needed to dedicate 4 entire videos to them. In part 1 we looked at the weird physical games, part 2 was about the Flash games, and in part 3 we tackled the Java games, many of which were thought to be completely lost until very recently. Now though, in part 4, we're bringing things up to present day by taking a look at the modern mobile games which you could get on iPhone and Android devices. You'd think that based on these games being much newer, that things would be rather straightforward here, but it seems that with this series, nothing is that easy. There's not quite as many games for us to talk about this time, but the games that we do have are a lot more fleshed out. So, that's enough preamble, and let's get started by taking a look at the 2008 release of Super Monkey Ball. No, not that Super Monkey Ball, this Super Monkey Ball. Now, believe it or not, the 2008 Super Monkey Ball was actually a pretty huge deal at the time, with it releasing as a launch title with the original iPhone's App Store. It went on to sell more than 300,000 copies in the first 20 days of its release. That's the equivalent of $3 million, and it alone accounted for over 10% of all iPhone software sales. Can you imagine a Super Monkey Ball game making that kind of a splash today? At the time, many considered this to be proof that mobile gaming has a viable future, paving the way to the landscape that we have today. While you absolutely can't deny the legacy of this game, it pains me to say that there's no easy way of playing this game for yourself. It's not impossible, but you need to have an older iPhone device, and you also need to have the technical know-how in order to jailbreak it and actually put the game file onto the phone. Either that, or you could just risk buying an older iPhone and just hoping that it already has the game installed on there, but that's a risk I'm not willing to take. Luckily for us, I just so happen to know another Monkey Ball nut who also has the expertise to get the game up and running. So, allow me to pass you over to Kardino, who's here to talk about Super Monkey Ball 2008.
Hey there, I'm Kardino, and it's always a good day when I get to talk about one of my favorite series again, and today's topic is Super Monkey Ball. Okay, I know Pixel just made this joke, but seriously, Sega, can you please learn what a subtitle is? This is potentially the 6th game in the span of less than a decade with the same name. So just to keep things clear, I'll be referring to this one as Monkey Ball iOS. But now that I've diverted from the topic within the first 30 seconds, let's actually talk about why this game is no longer available. You see, SMB iOS was a product of its time in more ways than one. I mean, Sega was clearly proud of this one, bragging that it was the first mobile port with absolutely no compromises. All for a single low price of $10, which was a vast improvement over paying $5 a month for Monkey Ball Bowling. But if they were so proud of it, why is it so hard to play nowadays? Well, it's because of a questionable decision they made back in 2015. Namely, the decision to pull 17 apps from across Google and Apple devices. More specifically, you could now only download these apps if you had previously bought them. If you're a newcomer, however, you're out of luck. They claimed it was because the apps no longer met their quality standards, but I personally think it was just because by this point, these apps were several years old. And in order for people to play them, they had to continuously release updates to keep up with phones. So it was probably easiest for Sega to simply delist them and focus on more relevant stuff. That's just my guess though. Now, let's get into the game. With all of Sega's boasting back in the day, is it truly possible to have a better experience than Ai-Ai's Funhouse? Well, like with many other Sega mobile ports going back to J2ME, the game was developed by an external studio. This time around, it was Other Ocean Interactive, who would eventually give us fine games such as, the 3DS port of Minecraft. So how did they handle this beloved series? Well, there's some good, some bad here. The first thing to note is this game's weird mixture of assets. We have the visuals and music from Banana Blitz, the character sprites and voice clips from Touch and Roll, and some additional sound effects from the classic games. I don't mind this decision for the most part. It's obviously we're constrained by the original iPhones' power, but still did their best to emulate the Wii entry. In fact, it only takes a few seconds of playing to notice this was most likely made with Touch and Roll's physics engine too. If I were to voice a grievance though, it's that there's an occasional issue with depth perception when you're navigating a 2D sprite representing a 3D sphere, but that's been an issue with almost every handheld Monkey Ball game. Anyway, let's move on to the gameplay. Similar to many other early iPhone games, Monkey Ball iOS uses gyro controls. You simply tilt your device and bam! Look at your monkey roll! Oops. I believe motion controls certainly have their uses, especially gyro, but I've never thought playing Monkey Ball was one of those circumstances. The biggest issue for me is the lack of tactile feedback. With a normal controller, you know how fast you're going without looking because you can feel the resistance in the stick. Or at the very least, you know what will generally happen if you press a direction on the D-pad. But with gyro, there's no such feedback, so you just kind of guess if a given tilt will move the ball 2 inches forward or send you careening into the abyss. It didn't work for Banana Blitz, and it certainly doesn't work here. It doesn't help that the issue is compounded when tilting the device also means tilting the screen, like using motion controls on the Switch in handheld mode. That being said, I'm not really sure of a much better alternative. Controllers weren't really supported on phones back then, and using virtual buttons would certainly not be viable. So I guess this was their best option. But at the very least, I wish they let you calibrate where the neutral position is. It's permanently set in an approximate 30-degree angle, and it's kind of uncomfortable. I know you weren't meant to play this thing for long periods of time, but there's no real good position to play, and I'm not sure what the devs expected you to do. Imagine going to a restaurant and while you're waiting to be seated, you just hunch over against the wall to play some Monkey Ball. But I think I've done enough complaining for now. One thing I do want to compliment the game on is its tutorial. It's fast, it's simple, and it has you playing the first world within a couple minutes. Honestly, I think this is something the other games could take notes on. Learning by doing is perfectly viable, but imagine playing an interactive version of SMB2's demo course. After that, it's on to the main game. There are 100 main levels here, each split into 5 worlds, sub-split into 2 level sets of 10. At that point, I'm not sure why they didn't just make each set its own world, but maybe it was to keep the file size down. Either way, all the themes are taken from Banana Blitz, and include Monkey Island, Smooth Sherbet, Detritus Desert, Volcanic Pools, and Space Case. By completing levels 1 through 10, you unlock levels 11 through 20, and completing an entire world unlocks the next. Simple enough. There are also 10 hidden levels to play if you're good, or more realistically patient enough. The stages themselves are designed surprisingly well. This can partially be attributed to them reusing some stages from the classics, and unlike Touch and Roll, a game I'm mentioning quite a bit come to think of it, there are a lot more originals here, so I don't mind at all. Though I must say, the stage order can be pretty bizarre. I think the biggest eyebrow raiser was when they had Slopes, a stage from SMB1 Beginner, in the final world. But Narrow Bridge, an advanced stage from the same game, is a hidden stage in World 3, so what's going on with that? The game overall is kind of easy, again most likely due to the controls, but towards the end, it can rough you up a bit. The one thing I take issue with is the sheer abundance of lives. Seriously, it's worse than Touch and Roll. You start out with 5 lives, and every 10 bananas nets you 1 more. But remember, these sets are 10 levels long, and the 5th level is always a bonus stage, often getting you another life or 2. And if that wasn't easy enough, you also get 5 continues. Do we really need 25 plus lives for 10 levels? And outside of resetting your score, using a continue has no penalty whatsoever. Now of course this difficulty is drastically increased if you crown a world, but Pixel's gonna cover that problem a bit later. For now though, all I'll say is there are 10 extra levels across the game to unlock. meaning this portable asset flip has more main game content than Banana Blitz, which is just kind of embarrassing. But that's it for the main game, and unfortunately, there's no mini-games here. Funny, considering they were so prevalent in the J2ME collection. But besides the main mode and the practice mode, there is one extra option here: instant play. This is a simple yet fantastic idea. Basically, you are immediately dropped into the game with a random stage and character. Simply beat it, then move on to the next random stage. You stop when you run out of lives. It's enjoyable as both a casual option, or if you like trying to get high scores. Oh, and there's no bonus stages, so it's all down to skill if you want to get big points. Of course, you can still use a continue, but your score will reset. There's no leaderboard for this mode, which I found disappointing, but due to the randomness of the stage order, I can sort of see why. Still, it's a great addition that I would love to see in future mainline entries. Monkey Ball iOS is a fun novelty. It was probably impressive for its time, but now, especially with it being so hard to play, I can only really recommend it to hardcore fans. I think my biggest complaint overall is the controls, but even with that, it's interesting to see a game that reminds me so much of Touch and Roll, even in the way it mixes old content with new stuff. Actually, you know what? If you want your handheld Monkey Ball fix, play Touch and Roll. In a lot of ways, it's a slightly better version of the iOS game. But with that, we return to the question: can we truly say this game surpassed the heights of Ai-Ai's Funhouse? Well, I think we all know the answer.
A big thanks goes out to Kardino for showing us Super Monkey Ball 2008 in action there. After you've finished this video, go to the description to see a link to his channel and give some of his stuff a watch. In the meantime though, the next game on our agenda is actually the direct sequel to the game that we just talked about and released a year later in 2009. And rather inventively, this one is called Super Monkey Ball 2. This game's history is actually a little bit confusing. The original 2009 release of the game is currently in the same inaccessible state as the 2008 game. Kardino has managed to get it running on his older device, but it turns out that the game was re-released in 2010 with some additional content under the name Super Monkey Ball 2 Sakura Edition. This re-release was originally exclusively available for the iPad, but did later come to other iOS devices. This 2010 Sakura edition is also once again very difficult to actually play nowadays, with it having been removed from app stores in 2015. The silver lining though is that the game was re-released in 2018 on iOS and Android devices, but this time dropping the number 2 from its title and simply being called Super Monkey Ball Sakura Edition. This is the first time in a very long while that I've actually been able to just go onto an online store and actually download a game legitimately. God, I've missed that. I've been having to jump through so many hoops in order to get some of these other games working, doing stuff like getting finicky emulators running, using third-party software, and even jailbreaking old mobile devices. But you can just go onto your phone right now and actually download this game properly. Imagine that. Something that I should probably say just before we start talking about this game properly is that the footage you're looking at is obviously in this super widescreen mode. The reason for this is that I was playing the game on a phone that has a wider aspect ratio than just 1080p. I could obviously just stretch the footage so that it looks like this and fills the entire screen, but I just think that this doesn't look right, so I'll keep it in the original aspect ratio. But yeah, it is actually pretty good how the game will automatically scale itself depending on the phone that you're using. The primary difference between the 2010 Sakura edition and this new 2018 version is that the 2018 version is free to play, but is supported by adverts. These would pop up whenever you fall off of the stage or enter a new level, making them extremely intrusive. Luckily, it's only £1.79 to just buy the game outright, which completely disables the adverts, making the experience much more enjoyable. Strangely, when I downloaded the game onto my Google Pixel 6, which runs Android, the adverts didn't actually work, meaning that I literally got the full game for free. A good few months ago I also got the game on my iPad and the adverts did display properly there, so I purchased the game in order to get rid of them. So maybe the adverts just don't function properly on Android devices? I'm not sure exactly what happened there. Even if you download the game and find out you have to pay for it though in order to remove the adverts, I'm here to confirm that it's definitely worth the price, because it turns out this is actually pretty good. Out of any of these obscure games that I've covered, Super Monkey Ball Sakura Edition is the one that I would most recommend, with it not only being good for a mobile game, but going head to head with some of the better main series games. In terms of quality, I would rate this at around the same level as Super Monkey Ball 3D for the Nintendo 3DS, which is high praise because I actually quite liked that game. Sakura Edition features 6 worlds to go through with a total of 110 levels. The graphics are upscaled to modern devices, which actually makes the game look pretty darn great. The music is taken from Banana Blitz and Steppenroll, which is a little bit lazy, but at least that means the quality of the music is quite high. And it actually controls really well, probably being the most precise motion controls I've ever used for Monkey Ball. It's pretty straightforward, just using your phone's gyro so that when you tilt it, it tilts the level in that direction. But it picks up on even tiny movements, making it so you can actually be very precise when moving on narrow paths. And this degree of control is far better than using the Wiimote in something like Banana Blitz. It helps as well that the levels have all been designed with motion controls in mind, meaning that they're all reasonably flat and nothing too dynamic ever happens with them. But we do still get a degree of challenge and a few nice gimmicks too, like moving platforms, bumpers and the like. The levels here are all completely original to this game too, meaning that even if you've played every other game in the series, there's still something new to find here. Remember as well that this has 110 levels, with the 10 additional ones originally being added in the 2010 Sakura edition as an incentive to pick it up again if you already had the 2009 release. This means that Super Monkey Ball Sakura Edition has more main game content than most of the other main series games, beating out Banana Blitz, Steppenroll and Banana Splits, which is pretty crazy to think about. On top of the already pretty content-heavy main game though, we also have 3 minigames here, which are all taken from the original GameCube game, but reworked to use touchscreen controls. First up, we have Bowling, which is actually one of the better versions of Bowling that I've played due to it being really sped up. The ball speed has been massively increased, you can skip all of the cutscenes, and it loads instantaneously, which means it's over in no time. This stops the pace from being too slow like it is in most of the other bowling minigames, which is normally my main criticism of it. However, even with this change, it's still a bit boring, but that's just a fundamental issue with the bowling game in general, and not the fault of this game specifically. Next we have Golf, and this is actually really good, and the new touchscreen controls are actually pretty intuitive, with you using your finger on a slider to simulate the club hitting the ball. However, the one thing that kills this version of the minigame is that even when you hit the ball with the putter as hard as you can, it hardly moves. This makes putting on the green really annoying because it straight up feels like it doesn't work properly and can totally ruin your score. Even with this fatal flaw though, it is still reasonably decent, and I had fun with it. Finally, there's Monkey Target, and this is a pretty dumbed down version of the minigame, with it being based on the Banana Blitz version rather than the superior version from the GameCube games. In this, your monkey is fired out of a cannon rather than rolling down a hill, and then you fly towards the target and need to control your speed to land as close to the middle as possible. The unfortunate thing with this is that there's no hazard wheel, no differently shaped targets, no wind meter, or anything like that to keep things interesting. Plus, it's locked to only being 3 attempts long, so it feels much more basic than some of the other versions did. While the minigames here are maybe a little bit basic, they do offer a nice distraction, and they're all designed to be playable in turn-based multiplayer too, which is a nice touch. So if you're ever bored with a friend while on a train or something, you can always partake in some Monkey Ball action. Now, I know I said earlier that there's only 3 minigames to be found here, and if you're playing the game on a standard mobile phone, that is true. But, did you know that if you play the game on an iPad, there's actually a 4th minigame? This 4th minigame is called Monkey Base, and strangely there seems to be hardly any information about this online. It's interesting though because it's the only one of the minigames here that features simultaneous multiplayer rather than having to take it in turns. This is clearly one of the reasons that this minigame is exclusive to the tablet version of the game, because I guess the theory would have been that a phone is too small to have multiple people gathering around it and touching the screen at the same time. The way that this works is basically like a multiplayer version of Atari's Breakout. You know the one, it's that game where you control a bar at the bottom of the screen and you have to keep deflecting a ball back towards the top in order to break blocks. Here though, there's 4 players in each corner of the screen, and the objective is to use your finger to drag your monkey around your base and stop lasers from destroying your defenses and hitting your banana. In other words, you have to defend your banana at all costs. Rather than just smacking the laser away though, when you move into it, you then have the ability to move and shoot it in a direction of your choice, meaning that you can actually be a little bit tactical and gang up on a player in order to get around the defenses. When a player is defeated, another laser will appear, so the longer a match lasts, the more hectic things become. I actually really liked this minigame, and it's easily the best one in the entire game. Clearly, I quite like this game, but I do have a couple of issues with it. Nothing completely experience ruining or anything like that, but I do feel like I should at least mention some of the negatives here. Probably the biggest issue with this whole game is this really annoying little nitpick where if you're going for 100% completion in the main game, you need to get all 10 bananas in each level. I actually like the concept with this because it becomes less about completing the levels quickly to maximise your score like it was in the original GameCube games, and more so about exploration and collectibles, which suits the gyro controls and it being a mobile game a lot better. The issue with this though is that you can't replay individual levels, so if you miss a banana in the 8th level in a set of 10, you'd need to play through the previous 7 levels all over again to give it another shot. And I know what you're thinking, surely if you miss a banana you could just fall off of the stage and then try again without replaying all of the previous levels. But no, if you fall off of the stage, you're locked out from being able to get all of the bananas because the ones that you already previously collected don't reset and your banana total is reverted back to 0, making it impossible to get all 10. Even if you happen to fall out without collecting a banana, you're still prevented from getting 100% completion because even if you did get all of the bananas on a second attempt, it simply won't count. Effectively, what this means is that you need to go through a set of 10 levels without falling out or timing out, and also while getting every single banana too. While I get that the game needed an element of difficulty, I feel like this was already there with simply getting the bananas and finishing the level in time. Often the game will place bananas in much more difficult to reach areas, so you need to go out of your way to actually collect them. This additional task of having to not fall out at all is a bit too much, and I would rather it have just have reset the bananas and allowed you to try again. Other than this one minor issue though, Super Monkey Ball Sakura Edition is great, and if you've not played it yet, I urge you to give it a go. The next game we're talking about is yet another one that's unfortunately completely inaccessible. This is despite the fact that it came out in 2012 and was available on Android devices, meaning that in theory it should have been easy to have backed the game up. The game I'm referring to is Super Monkey Ball Uki-Uki Seesaw, a Japanese exclusive title which weirdly just doesn't seem to exist anymore. Out of all of the lost games that we've talked about in this series, this is by far the one that's most likely to be rediscovered. After all, it must have been downloaded by quite a lot of people at some point and probably still exists on somebody's phone that's just gathering dust in a drawer. From what we know about Uki-Uki Seesaw, it appears to be a slightly graphically upgraded version of Tip and Till, with some screenshots showing the game being displayed in widescreen, which would have been awesome. As you know if you watched part 3 of this series of videos, Tip and Tilt was one of my favourite games out of all of these obscure ones, so to have an upgraded, modern version of that would have been great, but clearly it just wasn't meant to be. Luckily though, the same person who uploaded the gameplay of Super Monkey Ball Mobile, going by the name Person Who Posts Videos Provisional, also managed to record footage of Uki-Uki Seesaw too, meaning that we do have footage of the whole game being played even if we can't play it ourselves. Just like last time, a link to that video will be in the description if you want to give it a watch. Judging from this footage, it looks almost exactly the same as Tip and Till, only of course with it being on newer hardware. Interestingly, the footage here isn't in widescreen, which suggests that maybe it had several different display modes depending on what type of phone you have, or maybe depending on if you were holding it landscape or portrait. Just like with the other currently missing games in the series, this is another situation where we kinda got lucky here because we can already access Tip and Tilt through Java emulators. So the fact that Uki-Uki Seesaw is lost isn't the greatest tragedy, especially considering that it looks almost identical to the original version. It is still irritating though because having this on a newer phone would have been really nice and would have given people much easier access to it. And here we are at last, the final game of the video, and currently the last fully original game released in the entire franchise. Not counting Banana Blitz HD or Banana Mania, with them being a remaster and a remake, respectively. So here we are with Super Monkey Ball Bounce, which was released in 2014 for iOS and Android. And you know what? This is another game that isn't accessible on online stores due to it having been removed. Damn. Luckily though, this one is actually quite easy to play for yourself via an Android emulator. This is a really weird game in the series because it's basically a Peggle clone. You shoot a ball down into a series of blocks and bumpers, and the objective is to clear all of the special blocks, thus ending the level. You get bonuses for hitting different types of blocks, and you can even use power-ups that you find throughout the levels too. But one of the most interesting things about this game is that it actually has a story. So Professor Bossis, or is it Boskis, or Boskis? How the hell do you pronounce this? Either way, he's kidnapped all of II's monkey friends, and it's up to him to rescue them all by traversing the world and defeating various bosses. Traversing the world is of course done by completing the standard levels, and the bosses are defeated by having you hit them with your balls. Ouch. Out of all of the games in the series to have had a story mode and introduce us to a brand new original antagonist, I never would have expected it to have been this one. On the surface, this is actually a really good game. Despite the idea sounding like it could get repetitive very quickly, there's actually quite a few level gimmicks that keep things interesting. Like these tiki heads which you need to destroy by hitting all of the individual parts of the faces, levels where you only have one ball to clear the whole level, levels which feature more of a puzzle element where you need to bounce the ball around in order to reach a specific spot. And then on top of this, there's also additional characters that you unlock which all give you new power-ups and even unlockable skins for the characters too. However, the whole thing is very let down by the fact that this is a mobile game made in 2014, and you know what that means? Microtransactions, baby! You can pay to spin a roulette wheel which gives you prizes, you can pay to earn more lives so that you don't need to wait for a real world timer to count down if you get a game over, you can pay for more power-up usages and extra shots to finish a level that you're stuck on, and all of this really lets the game down. It feels less like a game and more like some kind of gambling software, only without a way of actually winning anything tangible. And it's disappointing considering that it is actually pretty well produced and the potential is clearly there for a good game. It's just a huge letdown when you come to a level that roadblocks you that's clearly there just to incentivize you to spend money, either through buying another shot or having you waste all of your lives because it's so difficult and then incentivizing you to pay to get more lives to try again. It sucks, and this is part of the reason that I tend to stay away from most mobile games. Another thing is that I'm not entirely sure that it would even be possible to spend money on this, considering that I'm technically emulating it. The way that Android emulation works is that it actually replicates a mobile device. So you do actually access the official Google Play Store in order to download stuff legitimately. But considering that this particular game isn't actually officially available anymore, I doubt the microtransaction elements would properly function. This means that the game is locked to being in this weird limbo state where it was created around having microtransactions, but you can't actually use them. This means that it feels completely unbalanced because of this inherent issue with its design. Like I say though, the bones of something good are actually there, but it's just not really worth your time considering how much of an effort it is to emulate and how it's clearly designed to require a constant feed of money. Disappointing. And that, my friends, wraps up not only this video, but this entire series. A little bit of a negative ending there, but it was bound to happen at some point considering we were looking at mobile games. Honestly, I'm actually quite surprised that there was only one game in the series that was fueled by microtransactions. I know it's taken way too long to actually finish these videos, but I hope you've enjoyed the ride. It's been a lot of fun discovering these games and sharing my thoughts on them, and I hope you found out something new about Monkey Ball. A huge thanks once again goes out to Kardino for his help with the last 2 videos. Definitely check his stuff out after this, because his channel is criminally underrated. As for any future plans covering the Super Monkey Ball series, well, I don't want to promise anything, but there are those 2 Super Monkey Ball arcade cabinets that I've actually never played. There's the possibility that some of these lost games that we've talked about could be discovered, and, of course, you know I'll be here to cover any new games released in the series too. Other than that though, we've covered every single game released in the Super Monkey Ball series, from the main stuff, the portable ones, the Flash ones, Java ones, mobile ones, and everything in between. Really feels like the end of an era. I hope you've enjoyed watching these videos just as much as I've enjoyed making them, and hey, if you have, give the video a like, subscribe to see more stuff like this coming soon, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!